He was an ex-Navy SEAL, haunted by a war that never left his mind. With his last $10,000, he bought an abandoned farmhouse deep in the snowy hills of Montana, hoping for silence, not salvation. But when he returned weeks later, smoke rose from the chimney. And someone was inside. A young woman, a German shepherd, and a secret buried in the snow that would change everything. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit subscribe so you never miss another story of loyalty, courage, and heart. Your support means the world. The wind howled across the frozen hills of Bozeman, Montana, carrying the sharp scent of pine and smoke. Snow blanketed the valley like a burial shroud, soft and endless, swallowing fences, fields, and memories alike. Eli Warren stepped out of his old Ford pickup, the engine ticking in the cold. The farmhouse stood on the ridge ahead, small, crooked, half-buried in snowdrifts. To most, it looked like a ruin. To him, it looked like quiet, and quiet was all he wanted. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, built by years of carrying rifles and silence. His face was all edges, cheekbones sharp beneath rough stubble, a faded scar along his jaw that caught the light when he turned. His dark hair, streaked with the first gray of middle age, was trimmed short, though the wind tossed it loose. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Gray, distant, like a man still watching something burn just over the horizon. He hadn't slept through a night in years. The nightmares always found him. The blast, the screaming, the quiet after. PTSD, they called it. For Eli, it was just the echo. It hummed beneath everything he did, even now, miles away from the war. His wife, Laura, had left 2 years ago. She didn't cry. She just stood in the doorway one morning, suitcase in hand, and said, "You came home, but you never really came back." Eli didn't stop her. He didn't know how. Now, with his last $10,000 in VA benefits, he'd bought this abandoned farmhouse in northern Montana. 10 acres of forgotten land where no one would bother him. He planned to fix the roof, mend the fences, and maybe remember what peace felt like. He pulled his coat tighter and started up the narrow driveway, boots crunching in the ice. Each breath left a faint cloud that vanished before his next step. The world here was quiet enough to hear his own heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, that felt like something close to hope. Then he saw it. A thin ribbon of smoke rising from the chimney. Eli stopped. His breath froze mid-air. That wasn't possible. The fireplace didn't work. He'd inspected it himself when he bought the place. The flue was packed with soot, the hearth full of bird nests. But now, faint and steady, smoke curled against the gray sky. He frowned, scanning the yard. The snow was clean near his truck, untouched. But closer to the porch he spotted them. Faint indentations, too small to be his. Footprints, 2 sets, 1 human, 1 animal. Something cold moved through him, not fear, but instinct, the kind that never left a soldier. His right hand brushed the side of his coat, fingers grazing the small .45 he carried more out of habit than intent. He climbed the steps quietly, testing each board before putting his weight down. The porch sagged under him with a long groan. The air smelled of burning pine and something else. Something human. A curtain near the front window trembled. Eli froze. Someone was inside. He didn't call out. Instead, he listened. A skill that came from years of clearing rooms and walking into places where silence meant danger. Inside, faintly, he thought he heard movement. A creak. Then stillness. Snow drifted lazily through the open sky. The world felt suspended, as if even the wind was waiting to see what he'd do next. Eli reached the door. Frost glazed the handle, catching the dying daylight. He hesitated. For a heartbeat, the absurd thought crossed his mind that maybe he was imagining this. Maybe the smoke was nothing but old memories curling back to life. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again. Harder. Still nothing. The valley was silent except for the soft hiss of falling snow. Eli exhaled slowly, the breath shaking just enough to betray him. He reached for the handle and turned. Unlocked. The latch gave a tired click. The door creaked open an inch, releasing a faint breath of warm air that brushed against his face. Firelight mixed with something else he couldn't name. And then, from somewhere deep inside the farmhouse, came a sound. Low, uncertain, not quite a growl, not quite a voice. Eli stood motionless, one hand on the doorframe, listening as the warmth spilled out into the cold. It wasn't the house breathing, it wasn't the fire, it was something alive. Warmth spilled into the hallway as Eli stepped inside, the heat from the small fire brushing against his face. For a moment, he just stood there, letting his eyes adjust from the pale blizzard outside to the flicker of orange light within. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp wool, and something human. The living room looked nothing like it had weeks ago. The floor had been swept. A stack of firewood leaned neatly against the wall. The broken window had been patched with cardboard and duct tape. Someone had tried to make the place livable again, one careful piece at a time. Then he saw movement near the fireplace, a figure frozen mid-motion. A young woman stood there, both hands clutching an old tin cup as if it could protect her. She looked to be in her early 20s, maybe 24. Her hair was a rich chestnut brown, uncombed and falling past her shoulders, framing a pale face that had forgotten warmth. A thin gray coat hung loosely over her small frame. Her boots were scuffed, her jeans torn at one knee. She looked like someone who hadn't had a home in a long time, but it was her eyes that held him, a shade of hazel green that seemed to flicker between fear and defiance. At her side stood a German shepherd, its fur thick and mottled tan and black, around 2 years old. His muscles were taut, ears pinned back, a low growl rolling deep in his throat. The dog's eyes were sharp, intelligent, untrusting, alert to every twitch Eli made. Eli raised a hand slightly, instinctively calm. "Easy, boy." His voice was low, even, the same tone he once used to quiet soldiers shaking after a firefight. The woman swallowed, her fingers trembling around the cup. "Please, don't call the police," she said, voice soft but strained. "We'll leave. We just needed somewhere warm." He studied her for a long moment. "We?" She rested a hand gently on the dog's neck. "Me and Rex." Rex. The dog stopped growling, though his tail remained stiff, waiting for a signal. Eli holstered his pistol, but his body stayed alert. "You picked the wrong place to hide," he said quietly. "I didn't know anyone owned it." Her eyes darted to the door. It looked empty. He scanned the room again. The blankets near the hearth, the carefully cleaned space, the empty cans lined up by the window. This wasn't the chaos of squatters or drifters. It was the order of someone trying to survive with dignity. "Why here?" he asked finally. Clara hesitated, her lips parting as if she'd been holding her story inside for too long. "Because it was far," she said softly. "Far from town, far from everyone." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. "My father died 3 months ago. They said it was a car accident, but it wasn't." Eli didn't move. "Go on." "He was a civil engineer," she said. "James Hayes. He was working on a survey for the Apex Terra Group. They're building that new resort down in the valley. Only it wasn't eco at all. He found out they were dumping chemical waste into the river." Her hazel eyes flickered toward the fire, the reflection trembling in her pupils. "He refused to sign off on the final report. A week later, he was dead. The police said he hit a patch of ice and slid off the road. But his tires were new. He'd been getting threats for months." Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. "After that, everything fell apart. My mom died years ago, so it was just me and Dad. I tried to fight the insurance, pay the hospital bills, but it kept piling up. $50,000 of debt. I sold everything. The house, his truck, his tools. Still not enough." She reached down to stroke Rex's fur, her voice dropping. "He was Dad's dog, trained for scent and rescue. Rex started acting strange after the funeral, pacing, whining. One night he wouldn't stop scratching the old shed. That's when I realized we were being watched. I packed up what I could and ran. Eli felt something shift in his chest. He knew what it meant to run. Not from danger, but from the ghosts that refused to let go. He glanced at the dog. Rex watched him steadily, ears twitching, nose flaring slightly as if reading his intent. "He's well trained," Eli said. Clara nodded faintly. "He's smarter than most people I know." The fire popped, throwing sparks up the stone chimney. Outside, the wind howled, pressing snow against the windows. Inside, the silence stretched, heavy but not empty. Eli finally spoke. "You got anywhere to go?" She shook her head. "Every shelter's full. The sheriff said I should move on." Eli caught the bitterness in her tone. That quiet, cold kind of anger that comes from realizing the world isn't built to help people like you. He stared at the fire for a long moment, thinking. She was just a kid. He didn't owe her anything. But something in her story, a father silenced for speaking up, a daughter left to fend for herself, stirred something buried in him. A memory of the men he couldn't save, the orders he couldn't refuse. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the rough scrape of his beard. "You can stay tonight," he said finally. "But tomorrow, we talk about what comes next." Clara blinked, eyes wide. "You mean it? Don't make me regret it." She nodded quickly, whispering, "Thank you." Rex seemed to sense the change, lowering himself near the fire, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. The tension in the room eased slightly. Eli turned toward the door, glancing back once at the girl and her dog curled near the fire. For the first time in years, the sound of another person's breathing filled the space that had once been only his thoughts. He stepped outside, closing the door softly behind him. The night air bit at his skin, and the chimney smoke twisted upward into the pale moonlight. It was strange, he thought, how a man could buy a house to escape humanity, only to find it already occupied by the very thing he'd been avoiding. Life. The days blurred together in a rhythm that neither of them expected. The farmhouse, once a hollow shell of decay, began to breathe again. Mornings were filled with the creak of tools, the scraping of shovels, and the soft growl of Rex patrolling the perimeter. Evenings, they shared silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy. Eli repaired the roof and reinforced the beams, his hands steady despite the tremors that came with the cold. Clara learned to light fires properly, to mend curtains from scraps, to cook with whatever she could find. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a fragile piece stitched together by exhaustion and quiet understanding. Outside, the Montana winter deepened. The wind sliced through the trees, and the snow grew thicker, heavier, as if the world wanted to bury them all. Yet inside, warmth returned, not just from the fire, but from something unseen. Rex remained the sentry of their small kingdom. He was never fully at rest. His ears twitched at the faintest sound, and at night he patrolled the yard with slow, deliberate steps. His coat, thick and lustrous, glowed amber in the firelight. When Clara laughed, a rare, quiet sound, Rex would lift his head as if proud to hear it. One evening, as the wind howled like a wounded animal, Eli was tightening the lock on the back door when Rex began barking. Not the short, warning bark he gave when a rabbit darted past. This was different, urgent, guttural. The dog charged toward the back of the property, kicking up snow. Eli grabbed his flashlight and followed, boots sinking deep into the drift. "Rex, easy, boy." The barking stopped near the old barn, a structure Eli had barely looked at since he bought the place. It was little more than a skeleton of timber, its roof half collapsed under years of snow. Rex stood at the entrance, teeth bared, his tail stiff. He pawed at one section of the wall, whining. Clara appeared moments later, breathless, clutching a lantern. "What's wrong?" Eli swept his light across the barn. Nothing moved but shadows and dust. Yet Rex refused to stop. He scratched at a section of rotten wood along the back wall, then barked again. 3 sharp bursts, then a low growl. "He's found something," Clara said, voice trembling slightly. She crouched beside Rex, pressing a hand to his back. "Good boy. Show me." Eli knelt beside them. The wood there looked different. Darker, oil-stained. He scraped away the top layer with his knife, revealing something solid beneath. The old timber gave way with a groan, and a narrow cavity appeared inside the wall. From within, Eli pulled out a small wooden box, the surface slick with old oil to keep it from rotting. It was heavier than it looked. The hinges were rusted, but the seal still intact. Clara's lantern flickered as she whispered, "What is that?" "Something your dog wanted us to find," Eli said, his voice low. He set the box on the ground and pried it open carefully, with the blade. Inside were papers wrapped in a layer of waxed cloth, maps, receipts, and photographs. The air filled with the scent of old oil and damp paper. Clara knelt beside him, her breath quickening. Eli unfolded the first document, a blueprint marked with red lines and handwritten notes. It was a pipeline map, showing a network that stretched across the valley and under the nearby river. Each section was labeled Waste Diversion. He turned over the next paper. Invoices stamped with the Apex Terra Group logo and chemical names he recognized from his time overseas. Solvents, toxins, illegal waste. At the bottom of the pile was a photograph. It showed a flatbed truck carrying sealed barrels, the Apex logo gleaming faintly under floodlights. Scribbled in the corner was a familiar signature. James Hayes. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. "That's my father's handwriting." Eli looked up. Her face had gone pale, her eyes wide but unblinking. "He said once," she whispered, voice breaking, "that if anything ever happened to him, Rex would know where to go. I thought it was just something he said to comfort me." Rex sat beside her now, calm and steady, watching them both as if his job was done. Eli examined the photo again, frowning. "Your father hid this here. Why?" Clara shook her head, tears threatening. "This barn used to belong to his friend, Daniel Cole. They worked together before Dad left the city project. When Daniel moved away, Dad helped him close up the property. I think—" She swallowed hard. "I think he hid the evidence here when he realized someone was following him." Eli glanced around the barn, suddenly alert again. If he was being watched, whoever did it might come looking for this. Clara looked at him with fear and anger tangled in her expression. "They already killed him, Eli. Don't you get it? They'll do the same to anyone who exposes them." He stood, fists tightening at his sides. "I've seen what people like that do. Men in suits giving orders while someone else bleeds for them. But they make one mistake every time. They think no one will fight back." He turned to her, the light catching the scar on his jaw. "Now we have proof." Clara stared down at the box, at her father's handwriting, at the evidence of a world built on lies. "And what do we do with it?" Eli's eyes met hers, steady, resolute. "We find someone who still remembers what justice means, and we don't stop until the world hears what your father died for." The wind howled outside, shaking the barn walls. But for the first time since he'd bought this farm, Eli didn't feel the cold. The storm came without warning. By dusk, the wind howled through the valley, flinging snow across the farmhouse in violent sheets. Inside, the fire sputtered as Eli packed his gear, a worn military rucksack, a flashlight, a weathered camera, and his old service knife. He moved with quiet efficiency, his expression carved from stone. Clara stood near the window, her face pale in the flickering light. She had traded her tattered coat for one of Eli's, far too big, the sleeves rolled up twice. In her gloved hands she held the folded map they had found inside the wooden box. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the storm. Eli glanced at her, eyes sharp and focused. "We have to move before the snow buries everything. Apex isn't going to wait for spring to cover their mess." Rex paced near the door, restless, his breath steaming in the cold air that seeped through the cracks. The German shepherd's fur stood in rough ridges, his instincts tuned to the danger ahead. He was the only one who didn't need convincing. They left just before nightfall, following the old trail down the frozen valley road. The headlights of Eli's truck cut through the storm, beams of white slicing through gray. Clara held the GPS tracker steady on her lap, tracing the route marked on her father's notes. "The pipes run under the riverbank," she said. "If they're still active, the waste discharge should show up near the construction site." Eli nodded, the tension in his jaw visible even in the dim light. "Then that's where we start." The drive was long, the snow relentless. When they reached the ridge overlooking the frozen river, Eli killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that made the world feel hollow. He stepped out first, the cold biting through his gloves, and motioned for Clara to follow. Rex leapt into the snow, nose to the ground immediately. His tail stiffened, ears erect. A few moments later, he gave a sharp bark, a signal. Eli followed him toward a cluster of pipes half buried under the ice. The smell hit first. Chemical, metallic, sour. Clara gagged. "Oh my God!" Dead fish lay frozen along the bank, their scales dulled to gray. Further up the hill, the twisted shape of a deer half buried in snow. Eli knelt beside the pipe, scraping a thin layer of frost off a rusted valve. It was still warm. "Active," he muttered. "They're still dumping." He took out his camera, snapping photos. The pipeline, the barrels, the frozen wildlife. Clara marked the GPS coordinates. "If we can get these to the right people, they can't bury it anymore," she said. Eli looked at her, the faintest nod of respect in his eyes. "Your father would be proud." By the time they returned to the farmhouse, it was past midnight. The wind screamed through the eaves, rattling the old boards. Clara was uploading the images to an encrypted email when Rex suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched. A low growl rolled from his chest. Eli froze. "What is it, boy?" Rex bolted to the window, barking once. Sharp, warning. Headlights flashed through the blizzard outside. 2 sets. Vehicles stopping near the gate. "Down!" Eli hissed. He killed the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The world outside was a blur of snow and faint movement. The first window shattered, shards scattering across the floor. Clara gasped. Rex lunged toward the noise, barking furiously. Eli grabbed his sidearm from the table. Not a soldier's reflex, but something deeper, older. 2 men in dark parkas pushed through the door. Their boots thudded against the wooden floorboards. One held a crowbar, the other a flashlight taped to a pistol. Rex launched first. The blur of fur and fury hit the intruder at chest level, knocking him backward into the wall. He screamed as Rex clamped down on his arm, teeth tearing through the sleeve. The second man swung his gun toward the sound, but Eli was already moving. Years of training took over. He hit the man low, knocking the weapon aside, driving a hard elbow into his ribs. The fight was fast, violent, silent except for the grunt of impact. The attacker fell hard, his head cracking against the floorboards. Eli straightened slowly, his breath steady, but his eyes cold. "They're Apex," he said. "Cleanup crew." Clara trembled, clutching Rex's collar to pull him back. "What do we do with them?" Eli looked down at the unconscious men. "We make sure they tell the truth, one way or another." By dawn, the storm had passed. Snow lay thick and silent over the land, covering the tracks but not the damage. In the weak light of morning, Eli and Clara stood outside, watching the sun break through the gray clouds. Within hours, the photos, coordinates, and a brief account of the attack had been sent to an independent environmental journalist named Maya Cortez, known for her relentless investigations into corporate corruption. Maya, a woman in her mid-30s with sharp, inquisitive eyes and haircut blunt to her shoulders, worked from Denver. She had seen too many cases buried under money and silence, and too many names like James Hayes forgotten. Her article went live 2 days later, headline blazing across national news. Apex Terra, group accused of poisoning Montana River. Whistleblower's death reopened. The backlash was immediate. Federal investigators swarmed the valley. The local sheriff and the mayor, both long rumored to be in Apex's pocket, were arrested for bribery and obstruction of justice. In a press release that same week, James Hayes was officially recognized as a whistleblower murdered in the line of duty. Apex's CEO resigned under pressure. And on national television, a photo of Rex appeared, the German shepherd who uncovered the truth, as he received the K9 Civilian Valor Medal for his bravery. Eli watched the news in silence, a rare hint of a smile softening his scarred face. Clara stood beside him, tears glinting in her eyes. "Your father did it," Eli said quietly. "Through you." Clara looked at him, really looked, and nodded. "No," she whispered, "through us." Outside, snow fell softly once more, but this time it felt clean. Spring came late to Montana. The last snow melted in reluctant patches across the valley, uncovering the dark earth beneath, and with it, a sense that life, somehow, had endured. Eli Warren stood on the porch of the farmhouse, now fully repaired, its roof glinting under the pale sunlight. The sharp wind that once carried only silence now brought faint laughter from the nearby road, where trucks and volunteers came and went. Behind him, the wooden sign above the entrance read, "The Hayes Community Center." Clara had chosen the name herself. She appeared at his side, the wind tugging at her hair, longer now, sun-browned and streaked with copper light. She wore a simple white blouse beneath a denim jacket, sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her face no longer carried the hollow strain of loss. There were fine lines of exhaustion still, but they had softened into something steady, a kind of peace earned through fire. "They finished installing the therapy room today," she said, smiling faintly. "Veterans from 2 towns over came to help. One of them brought his teenage son, said he wanted him to see what healing looks like." Eli nodded, eyes tracing the horizon. "It's a good thing you're building here." Clara glanced at him. "We're building it." Inside, the old farmhouse had changed completely. Where broken beams once hung like ribs, sunlight now streamed through wide glass windows. The main hall held tables, a small library, and shelves stocked with supplies, blankets, canned food, and art kits. In the corner, a large photo of James Hayes hung framed, his eyes kind and resolute. Below it, a plaque read, "For those who spoke the truth when silence was safer." Rex trotted down the hall, his steps confident, tail swaying. He wore a dark blue harness now, marked PTSD service dog, and carried himself with the calm authority of a veteran healer. His muzzle had grown broader, his eyes gentler. But when children came through the door, his entire posture changed, tail wagging, ears perking up. He had become a symbol, a creature once born to guard, now teaching others to live again. Eli watched as Rex greeted a new visitor, a man in his 40s, military jacket zipped to the throat, face weathered and tired. The man hesitated at the entrance, then crouched, letting the dog sniff his hand. Rex licked his fingers gently. Something in the man's shoulders loosened. "That's Sergeant Lewis," Clara whispered. "Afghanistan. Lost his unit to an IED. He hasn't spoken much in years, but with Rex, he doesn't have to." Eli said nothing, his throat tightening. In the weeks after the Apex trial, Clara had used part of the compensation, $2.5 million, after legal fees and settlements, to buy back her father's old house. But instead of moving in, she had turned it into this center, a refuge for veterans, survivors, and anyone who had lost their sense of belonging. Eli, with his monthly VA disability, checks and a quiet resolve became her silent partner. He handled maintenance, training programs, and logistics. More than that, he became a voice, reaching out to veteran networks across the country, convincing others that recovery didn't mean forgetting, but building. When a small local newspaper ran a story about the project, it spread further than either of them imagined. Soon, other communities began writing, from Colorado, Ohio, even Maine, asking how to replicate it. They called them silent farms, places where those once broken could mend through labor, purpose, and compassion. One afternoon, a television crew arrived, 2 journalists from a national station. The reporter, a petite woman with sharp blue eyes named Kendra Mills, asked to film a short piece about the center. Her voice carried a mixture of warmth and professionalism, but when she spoke to the veterans, she listened. Really listened. Rex stole the spotlight, of course. Cameras followed him as he guided visitors through the garden, where raised beds now held rows of young vegetables. Children from local schools came every weekend to plant and learn. Clara taught them how to nurture the soil, how life could start again even after a winter that felt endless. That evening, as the camera crew left, the valley was bathed in gold. Eli stood by the porch rail, watching Clara lock up the main door. The air smelled of pine and thawing earth. "Your father would have liked this," he said. She smiled softly. "He used to tell me that a house isn't where you live, it's where others are welcome." Eli turned toward the horizon, the sunlight reflected in his eyes. "And sometimes," he said quietly, "the lost ones are the first to find the way home." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring rain. Rex lay down near the steps, head resting on his paws, watching the sky turn from gold to silver. Behind them, laughter echoed from the community hall. People once broken, now building again. The farmhouse stood strong, its walls no longer hiding secrets, but sheltering hope. And as the last light faded over Montana's hills, 3 lives, once shattered by loss, had become the foundation of something larger, something whole. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come as thunder or fire from the sky. They come quietly, in the shape of a wounded soldier learning to smile again, a girl rebuilding her father's dream, or a loyal dog who never stopped believing in the goodness of people. Maybe that's how God works, not through grand gestures, but through ordinary hands willing to do something kind. Through the warmth of a shared fire, a rebuilt home, or a second chance we didn't think we deserved. So, if this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it, because someone out there might be standing in their own storm, waiting to be reminded that faith, love, and redemption still exist. Leave us a comment, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss another story of courage, hope, and God's quiet miracles. May He bless you and everyone you love, tonight and in every season that follows.